You keep ruining things just as they begin to go right. A new relationship, a promising job, a path to healing. And then something inside you whispers, it's not going to last. And it doesn't, because somehow, almost unconsciously, you make sure it falls apart. Not because you're weak, but because you're terrified of who you might become if you actually stopped suffering. Nietzsche once said, "Man is the cruelest animal." But he wasn't just talking about war or violence. He was talking about the quiet, internal cruelty you inflict upon yourself. The hidden sabotage, the spiritual chokehold, the silent voice that tells you, stay small, stay broken, you don't deserve more. You've probably felt it before. That strange pull toward failure, the compulsion to provoke a fight, to delay a deadline, to numb yourself just when life starts to open up. You say it's fear of rejection, fear of success, fear of responsibility. But deep down, it's something older. Something Nietzsche saw more clearly than almost anyone. He believed that you're not just a passive creature reacting to life, you're a battleground. Inside you, there's a will to become more, to transcend. But that same will is burdened by shame, memory, and fear of what transformation will demand. You want to grow, but you also want to remain familiar to yourself. So you create patterns. You cling to pain. You destroy what might heal you, because healing would mean letting go of the identity you've built around your wounds. Nietzsche's entire philosophy revolves around the tension between who you are and who you might become. He called it the will to power. Not a thirst for dominance, but a deep, internal drive toward becoming your fullest self. But that drive isn't pure. It's tangled with resistance. And that resistance often looks like laziness, procrastination, addiction, when in fact it's fear in disguise. You don't sabotage yourself because you hate yourself. You sabotage because you're afraid to confront how much power you actually hold, and how much you'd have to leave behind to use it. Think of the times you've walked away from something good. Not because it was wrong, but because it was unfamiliar. Because success would have meant rewriting the story you've told yourself about who you are. The outsider, the victim, the quiet one, the misunderstood. Nietzsche warned that this identity, though painful, is seductive. Because it's safe. It gives you certainty. And if you suddenly became someone powerful, expressive, creative, courageous, you'd lose that safety. You'd become a stranger to the version of you that was born in survival mode. But here's where it gets even more twisted. The deeper your potential, the more violent your sabotage becomes. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what if you don't know your why? Or worse, what if you've buried it under years of guilt, failure, and silence? You'll turn that suppressed potential inward. You'll weaponize it. You'll start to destroy not because you want destruction, but because you can't yet imagine yourself building. It shows up in subtle ways. You wake up late and blame the clock. You avoid the call that might change your life. You stay in the relationship that's shrinking your soul. You say it's logic, timing, intuition, but often it's just fear dressed as strategy. Nietzsche's genius was in showing that suffering itself can become addictive, not in a masochistic way, but in a psychological one. Because suffering gives you clarity. It simplifies the world into villains and victims. It gives you a role to play, protects you from the messiness of freedom. And that's the paradox. You crave liberation, but also fear the responsibility that comes with it. So you sabotage, quietly, repeatedly, intelligently. You kill your own momentum before anyone else gets the chance to. Because at least then, you're in control of the fall. But Nietzsche didn't believe you were doomed to this cycle. He believed in something else, something radical, even terrifying: transvaluation. The act of rethinking everything you've been told is good or bad. Strength isn't always loud. Weakness isn't always pitiful. Chaos isn't always destructive. Pain isn't always punishment. What if the breakdown you keep avoiding isn't the end, but a doorway? That's where you are now. Not broken, not failing, but standing in the exact place Nietzsche called the abyss. That deep internal silence where the old self starts to die, and the new self hasn't yet found its voice. It's terrifying because it's unfamiliar. You want to run back to your suffering because at least it feels like home. But what if this time you don't run? What if you sit with the discomfort and listen to what it's really saying? You're not lazy. You're afraid of your potential. You're not weak. You're untrained in your own power. You're not lost. You're mid-transformation. And the sabotage is not your nature. It's your last defense against becoming someone who no longer needs it. Because if you stopped sabotaging, who would you become? Who would you be if you trusted yourself, acted on your instinct, followed the truth instead of the fear? Nietzsche didn't want you to become someone else. He wanted you to become who you truly are before the world taught you how to hide. And maybe that's the real terror. Not that you're unworthy, but that you are worthy, and you've known it all along. But you don't escape sabotage by shaming yourself out of it. You escape it by understanding the precise moment you betray your own becoming. And you felt it, that hesitation right before saying what you mean, that impulse to shrink when the spotlight turns your way, that pull to stay silent when everything inside you screams to speak. That's not hesitation, that's resistance. And Nietzsche believed resistance always conceals a deeper truth, that you're closer to a breakthrough than you think. You sabotage most when you're near transformation. It's as if your psyche knows. Once you cross that invisible line, there's no going back. You can't unsee your own potential. You can't pretend to be small once you've glimpsed your magnitude. So the sabotage isn't random. It's defense. It's survival strategy from an outdated self, one that was built to endure, not to thrive. And the moment you realize this, really realize it, you start to see sabotage not as weakness, but as a signal. A flare from the subconscious saying, you're leaving the version of yourself I know how to protect. And that's terrifying because that old self, the one addicted to struggle, gave you structure. It gave you identity. But Nietzsche challenges you to do something bold. Become who you are, not who you've been, not who they told you to be, but who you are beneath the fear, beneath the masks, beneath the sabotage. You begin to notice the lies you've rehearsed so long they feel like truth. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. I'll ruin it anyway. These aren't reflections of who you are. They're defenses against who you could become. And Nietzsche would tell you, if you want to stop sabotaging your life, you must confront the values that make sabotage feel safer than success. He called it the slave morality, a belief system built around comfort, humility, and guilt. A morality that says suffering is noble, ambition is prideful, and staying small is virtuous. But he didn't just want to destroy that system. He wanted you to transcend it, to replace it not with cruelty, but with courage. Not with domination, but with creation. Because the real enemy of self-sabotage isn't willpower, it's truth. So here's the truth. You've been serving two masters. One wants to stay wounded because wounds explain your fear. The other wants to grow wings. And they're both inside you, pulling. One whispers, you'll be abandoned if you change. The other screams, you'll die if you don't. Nietzsche didn't offer comfort. He offered confrontation. He forced you to ask, what is it costing me to keep pretending I'm powerless? Because pretending is easy. Pretending is safe. But it leads to what he feared most, nihilism. The slow, spiritual death that comes when you abandon meaning because meaning demands responsibility. You may think self-sabotage is about a bad habit, a lack of discipline. But it's deeper than that. It's existential. It's what happens when your soul aches for evolution but your ego clings to survival. It's not about whether you're productive enough or bold enough. It's about whether you're willing to become unrecognizable to your past self. Because becoming who you truly are means betraying who you've been. And this betrayal is sacred. Because when you sabotage your potential, you are, in Nietzsche's words, declaring war upon the heights. You are rejecting the very struggle that would give your suffering meaning. And meaning, to Nietzsche, is the only thing that makes life bearable. He didn't believe in shallow happiness. He believed in the joy that comes from staring chaos in the face and choosing to create anyway. That's your task now. Not to fix yourself. Not to perfect yourself. But to stand in the ruins of your former self and ask, what can I build here? Because this is what Nietzsche meant by the eternal recurrence. The idea that your life, in all its pain and potential, might repeat forever. Would you live differently if you knew you'd live this day again and again? Would you still sabotage? Or would you finally risk becoming whole? You've been fighting yourself not because you're broken, but because you're breaking out. Your sabotage is the friction of transformation. And if you can feel that friction and not run, if you can sit inside the discomfort without numbing, distracting, collapsing, you've already begun the journey Nietzsche believed was reserved for the strongest. The journey toward becoming the artist of your own existence. Because that's what you are, beneath the fear. Not a victim of chaos, but a sculptor of self, a creator of meaning. And your sabotage is not your enemy, it's your final test. Are you willing to give up who you were for the possibility of becoming who you are? The moment you realize your sabotage is not weakness but a signal, something ancient inside you begins to shift. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What truth am I afraid to live?" And that question, that single question, is the key that Nietzsche spent his entire life forging. Because he knew something most never admit. Self-sabotage is not about fear of failure. It's about fear of consequence, of success, of exposure, of finally becoming what you secretly believe you might be, not mediocre, not invisible, but dangerous in your power. And if that power ever fully woke up, everything would change. Your friends might not recognize you. Your patterns would collapse. Your excuses would evaporate. And that's the terror behind the sabotage. You wouldn't have anything left to hide behind. You've built your life on scaffolding roles, beliefs, limitations. But Nietzsche's psychology wasn't about reinforcing those. It was about burning them down. That's why he warned against becoming a mere function of the herd. Because the herd loves your sabotage, keeps you predictable, keeps you loyal, keeps you small. But your soul was never meant to belong to the herd. It was meant to rebel, not in rage, but in truth. And here's the truth. There's a version of you that doesn't sabotage anymore. Not because they're fearless, but because they've made peace with fear. They see it as wind in their wings. They've stopped seeing doubt as a threat and started seeing it as an invitation. They've stopped punishing themselves for stumbling and started understanding that stumbling is how you walk in the dark. But that version of you can only be born through the fire Nietzsche called the will to power. And this isn't about power over others. This power over illusion, power over inertia, the power to choose meaning in the face of absurdity. Because if there's one thing Nietzsche gave you, it's this: life has no built-in meaning, but you can give it one. And the meaning you choose must be stronger than your fear of it. You begin to notice how sabotage shrinks in the presence of clarity. When you know who you are becoming, you stop negotiating with the version of you that just wants comfort. You stop needing approval from people still addicted to their own cages. You stop trying to please the voices in your head that were never yours to begin with. And you begin, slowly, quietly, to build something Nietzsche would call sacred, the self as an artwork. You become both the sculptor and the stone. Every fear you confront becomes a chisel. Every time you feel the urge to sabotage but don't, you carve away another layer of who you're not. Until what remains is not perfection but authenticity. This is not a linear path. Some days you will still fold, still run, still believe the old stories. But Nietzsche didn't ask you to be flawless. He asked you to be willing. Willing to wrestle angels in the night. Willing to choose evolution over comfort. Willing to stare at your own reflection and say, "I see you, and I'm not running this time." And that moment, that sacred pause, is when everything begins to change. You stop being a prisoner of your sabotage and become the observer of it. Then the alchemist. Then, finally, the master of it. Because in Nietzsche's world, suffering was not the enemy. It was the crucible. Sabotage wasn't a flaw. It was the forge. And you are the fire, not the ashes. So the next time you feel that urge rising, to pull back, to quit, to ruin something just before it gets real, pause. Look deeper. What are you actually afraid of? Is it failure or responsibility? Is it rejection or exposure? Is it that you're not enough or that you're finally realizing you might be? And then ask the only question that matters. If I stopped sabotaging, what would I have to face? Because when the answer to that question no longer scares you, your old self won't need to protect you anymore. It will finally step aside, and in its place will rise something fierce, something free, something Nietzsche saw as the rarest of all creations, the individual who has mastered themselves, not in arrogance, but in alignment, not in control, but in creation, not in fear, but in fire.